Here's the deal. In a few minutes, you're going to hear a sound that almost no one in the world has ever heard. This sound was lovingly conceived, designed, performed, and recorded, edited with the care and craftsmanship of an artist. A sound designed to be played millions of times a day in every corner of the planet, destined to become one of the most well-known sound marks of all time, and yet only a handful of people have ever heard it. I'm referring to the missing Windows 8 startup sound, designed to be played every time you started up your computer for the last decade, but instead lost to the dustbin of history. Until now. If you missed my last video, and you might have since it was more than a year ago, you may want to check it out first. I tell the story of the Windows startup sounds, admit my role in the last decade of silent Windows logins, and also beg for forgiveness. But I also let you in on a secret. This missing sound still exists. I've got it right here. Shall we begin? Let's talk about how sounds get made in the first place. The process of designing the hundreds of sounds included in Windows 8 took almost a year. First, you need a sound designer, and the creator of the Windows 8 sounds was a renowned composer named Matthew Bennett. Every Thursday afternoon, Matthew, our director of design, and me would get together in a special locked conference room in Microsoft's Building 84 for a listening session. I'll tell you more about this special conference room in a future video, but here's a hint. Some of you have seen it before. Every week, Matthew wheeled in a cart that included his computer, a pair of speakers, and a melodica, and we spent an hour listening to and talking about the sounds he brought to try out. Now, have you ever been to an eye doctor where they show you a series of images and say, which is better, A or B, A or B? This was exactly what working with Matthew was like. He might bring in 5 variations of a sound, A, B, C, D, and E, and we would listen to each of them and talk about which we liked and which we didn't. Matthew would then go back to his studio and work on revisions for the next sound review meeting. And through this process, we eventually finalized all the sounds that got included in Windows. And no sound was more crucial than the startup sound. We listened to hundreds of alternatives that eventually got whittled down to just one, the official Windows 8 startup sound. And then, as you know, I killed it. Meaning that very few people in the world have even heard it. Until now. Drumroll, please. Without further ado, may I present for the very first time the missing Windows 8 startup sound. Let's hear that one more time. So, how did we design this sound? Well, I just so happened to have Matthew right here to talk about it.
All right, here's my melodica, my trusty melodica. I don't compose at a computer anymore. I just compose at this thing, and everything ends up sounding like a cowboy tune. But that's okay. That's going to be actually the new sound design direction for all my clients. So the main melody of the Windows 7 startup sound was this. So the first thing I did was bring it into the key that we were using for the Windows 8 sounds, which was a little bit higher. So I'm moving it up from like an E suspended or pentatonic to an F. And then I also, we just found after a lot of experimentation that instead of making it just like a straight melody that goes up, giving it a little zags to like Windows 8, right? For the Windows 7 sound, they had been thinking very consciously, Windows 7. And, this mnemonics, vocal mnemonics aren't always super critical, but if there's a resonance between the way they sound and between the product, it can be nice. So I was thinking Windows 8.
So there is the Windows 8 startup sound. And some of you are disappointed, chucking tomatoes at the screen. Jensen, you say, I've heard this sound before. And alas, that might be true. You see, this sound was hidden in plain sight all along. As I mentioned in the last video, I ended up somewhat regretting the decision to remove the sound, but by then it was too late to turn it back on by default. However, I still wanted to use the sound myself, and I thought others might want to as well, so I kept the sound in Windows hidden and just turned off. In fact, if you peeked in the Windows Media folder on your PC, there was this innocuous little file called Windows Logon. This is the intended startup sound, there all along. And although most people never heard this sound, it wasn't fully undiscovered. People wrote blog posts about it, discussed it on message boards, and there was even an entire podcast episode devoted to revealing this hidden sound. Unknown, yes, but not undiscovered. But now, I have a confession. I lied to you. There wasn't one missing startup sound. There were actually two. And the real hidden Windows startup sound has only ever been heard by a few people until now. Before I continue, if you like my content, could you gently tickle the subscribe button? It's been more than a year since my last video, so it's not like you're going to get overwhelmed. In fact, if you want literally any chance of seeing my future videos, you'll probably need to discreetly poke the notification bell too. Anyway, so there was a secret project going on at Microsoft at the same time we were working on Windows 8. Known to only a few people, a small team of designers and engineers were brought together to create a revolutionary new product for Microsoft. The team was obscurely named WDS, and the device they were working on was codenamed Georgetown. These names were both picked to sound as uninteresting as possible. When I first met the team, there were less than a dozen people working in a secure, windowless secret lab behind an old service kitchen on the first floor of a nondescript Microsoft building. Next to janitors' closets and stainless steel work sinks, you never would have guessed that behind these generic wooden double doors were people working to change the PC industry forever. This was one of the most secret projects in the history of Microsoft. The team was led by Panos Panay, now Microsoft's chief product officer, and the devices they were working on would be revealed to the world in June 2012, Microsoft Surface. And Microsoft wanted absolutely no leaks before the unveiling, which meant that only very few people knew about the project. Because I was responsible for Surface's user interface, I was one of the people on the Windows team with knowledge of the Georgetown product. And as we worked with the WDS team on shaping our touch software together with the Surface hardware, I knew it was going to be a big moment. And I wanted it to have a signature sound, one that would kind of herald the beginning of the Surface era. Only I had a problem. Remember Matthew Bennett, the sound designer? I wasn't allowed to tell him about Surface. I couldn't even hint at it. So how could I get a second secret startup sound for Surface from Matthew, all without telling him why I needed it? Well, remember the listening sessions I described earlier? As we were getting closer to finalizing the Windows startup sound, Matthew brought in a few variations of a theme he had been playing with for a few weeks. One of them, a 4-note sound, I thought was perfect for Surface. There was also a shorter, related 3-note sound that I also thought was less complete, but good. So, in the design review, I told Matthew, sorry, that 4-note sound is good, but it's just too long for a startup sound. Let's concentrate on the 3-note sound. And that was that. That 3-note sound became the Windows 8 startup sound you heard earlier. But I secretly took the 4-note sound and brought it to the person responsible for the special customized build of Windows that went on to Surface devices. So the regular 3-note sound went into normal Windows, and the special 4-note sound went into Surface. Months later, when I decided to turn off the startup sound by default, I also took this 4-note sound out of the Surface software, since it wasn't going to be really heard by anyone anyway. So the real, true Windows 8 startup sound was lost to history. The real sound intended to be heard when any Surface device was started up anywhere in the world, gone. Until now. Here it is. It's the Windows 8 startup sound, but with a grounding low note at the beginning. It mirrors the 4-note progression of the Windows 7 startup sound. but it's more complete and fuller. Here's Matthew talking about how he composed the sound.
So in trying to figure out the ideal rhythm of sound to support a more modern, faster startup sequence, I was really leaning towards the 3-note version because it felt more crisp, a little more concise, and a little more modern. But at that time, we were also really struggling with the 4-note version. And one nice thing about that I still like about it when I think about it is that it had that kind of low note, like a bum. I'm going to play it again. It had the low note, and that first note sort of provides a frame and a breath, sort of like an upbeat, if you will, not a literal upbeat, but just sort of a moment of focus and framing for the next 3 notes. So you got, and actually I made it a little longer there. Maybe we should have done that. But that's different than just jumping right into the three notes out of nowhere. That's okay, and that is kind of quick and fast. But there's a certain kind of fluid motion with the low note. It kind of captures your attention, and it's a little less aggressive, so it can be a little gentler. And looking back, I think that probably would have been the best choice. So if you were leaning towards that for the premium device, which I didn't know at the time, I think you were right on. And it's not like the 3-note version was bad. It just was. It definitely had a slightly less refined feeling when I look back at it now.
You've now heard the sound lost to history, and you know how and why it never made its way into the world. What do you think of it? Which version do you like better? Let me know down in the comments. I read all of them. And of course, thanks to my patrons for their support never mind. I guess that's all for today. As always, thanks so much for watching.